My name is David Chen, or at least I hold on to that name like a man clutching a single piece of driftwood in a vast empty ocean. I was once an appraiser of antiquities, a man who believed only in what he could touch, date, and verify. Provenance was my creed, and history was my scripture. I dealt in facts, not folklore. But a small, intricately carved wooden box taught me that some legends are not stories, but warnings. I opened it out of professional curiosity and found nothing inside. I was wrong. It didn't contain a spirit, it contained an absence. And now, that absence follows me, feeding on my life's most precious moments, leaving me a ghost in my own home, racing to fill the void before I am forgotten completely. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The grain of the Louis XVI commode told a story under my fingertips. I could feel the subtle ripple of the quarter-sawn oak, the faint planer marks left by a craftsman 2.5 centuries ago. To my clients, I was an appraiser. To myself, I was a translator of inanimate objects, giving voice to the silent history embedded in wood, silver, and canvas. My workshop was a temple of the tangible, a library of things. Every artifact had a story, a lineage, a provenance. If it couldn't be proven, it was merely conjecture, and I had no time for that. My reputation was built on a foundation of skepticism and irrefutable proof. My life, outside this world of dust and varnish, was built on something much warmer. My wife, Anna, a brilliant professor whose mind was as sharp as my own, and our daughter, Lily, whose laughter was the truest and most valuable thing I had ever known. That's why I initially dismissed the email from Mr. Alistair Finch. Finch was a new client, one of the tech money eccentrics who collected not for passion, but for novelty. His requests were always specific, often bordering on the bizarre. This time it was for a Dybbuk Box. The term alone made my lip curl in disdain. It was modern folklore, a ghost story born on the internet, a campfire tale for the digital age. But Finch was paying, and paying well. The item was listed in a small, obscure online auction from an estate in rural Oregon. The pictures were grainy, showing a small wooden box no larger than a book, dark with age and intricately carved with patterns that seemed to defy any specific culture or period. The seller's notes were a masterclass in melodramatic fiction, inherited from my grandmother who warned it must never be opened, sealed with wax from a blessed candle, said to contain a restless spirit, not responsible for any paranormal activity that may result. I let out a short, derisive laugh. It was a sales pitch, and a lazy one at that. Still, the carvings were unique, and the wood, from what I could tell, looked genuinely old. Finch wanted it acquired and authenticated. The acquisition was the easy part. The authentication was my true purpose. I won the auction for a surprisingly low sum. A week later, a package arrived. Inside a nest of bubble wrap and packing peanuts was the box. It was heavier than I expected. The wood was a deep, lustrous ebony or perhaps walnut, stained nearly black by time. The carvings were even more unsettling in person. They weren't demonic or overtly threatening, but they were chaotic, flowing into one another in a way that felt mathematically wrong, making the eye struggle to find a resting place. And as the seller had promised, the seam between the lid and the body was sealed with a thick, clumsy line of dark purple wax. I took it into my secure workshop, a climate-controlled room where my best tools and instruments were kept. For 2 days, I studied it from the outside. I ran a spectrographic analysis on the wood. It was old, certainly 19th century, possibly older. The style of carving was a dead end. It matched no known tradition. It was an enigma, which, despite my skepticism, always gave me a professional thrill. But to truly do my job, to assess its construction, its inner lining, its full story, I had to look inside. The folklore was an amusing footnote, nothing more. My duty to my client, and to my own professional standards, required me to open it. On the third day, I decided the external examination was complete. I placed the box in the center of my steel work table, overhead lamp casting a sterile white light upon it. The legends were just hype, a narrative tacked on to a strange but beautiful object to inflate its value. With the detached precision of a surgeon, I took a fine-tooled chisel and a small mallet. I would not break the seals as some clumsy horror movie character would. I would carefully remove them, preserving as much of the object's integrity as possible. The wax was brittle. It flaked away under the chisel's edge, falling onto the table in dark purple crumbs. The final piece came off with a dry snap. For a moment I paused, looking at the now unsealed seam. A flicker of something, perhaps the deeply ingrained human hesitation to disturb the unknown, pricked at me. I dismissed it as foolishness. I was David Chen, a man of provenance and proof. I placed my fingers on the lid and lifted. It opened silently. No creak of ancient hinges, no gust of spectral wind. The interior was lined with a deep blue, almost black velvet that seemed to drink the light. And it was empty. Completely. Utterly, disappointingly empty. There was no secret compartment, no inscription, no lingering dust of a long-vanished object. Nothing. I leaned closer, my professional curiosity turning to mild irritation. Had someone already pried it open and removed its contents? But the seals were old, authentic. As I peered into the small, dark space, I noticed a smell. It wasn't the familiar, pleasant scent of old wood and dust. It was cold, clean. A sterile, chemical sharpness, like the air after a violent lightning strike. The smell of ozone. As I inhaled that strange scent, the world tilted violently. A wave of intense, crippling vertigo washed over me. The workshop, my sanctuary of logic and order, seemed to lurch as if the foundations had given way. I gripped the edge of the steel table to steady myself, my knuckles white. My ears rang with a high-pitched tone. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. I stood there for a full minute, breathing heavily. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was nothing. A head rush. I'd probably been leaning over too long, stood up too fast. That was the logical explanation. That was the only explanation. The box was just a box. An interesting, well-crafted, but ultimately unmagical antique. Probably a wine box or a jewelry case, its history inflated by superstitious airs. I closed the lid, the faint smell of ozone already dissipating, and began to formulate my report for Mr. Finch. It was a beautiful object, but it contained nothing at all. The unsettling feeling from the workshop clung to me like a damp coat on the drive home. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on low blood sugar or a lack of sleep. By the time I walked through my front door, the warm chaos of family life nearly washed it away. Lily ran to me, her small arms wrapping around my legs, her hair smelling of crown and appletus. Anna kissed me, her smile the anchor of my world. This was my provenance. This was the tangible proof of my life's value. The memory of the empty box and the strange vertigo began to feel distant, almost silly. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Anna and I sat in the living room, a comfortable silence between us. My eyes drifted to the mantelpiece, to a framed photograph that was my favorite in the entire house. It was from our wedding day. We were standing under a massive oak tree, just after the ceremony. I was looking at her and she was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes sparkling with a joy so pure it felt sacred. The photographer had caught the perfect moment, the absolute zenith of our happiness. I knew that memory like I knew my own name. I could feel the scratch of the wool suit, smell the rain-washed scent of the grass, taste the champagne we'd just sipped. But as I looked at it now, something was wrong. The image was there, the faces were ours, but the feeling was thin. It was like watching a movie about two strangers. I could recognize the scene, but the emotional current that usually surged through me when I saw it was gone. It was a photograph of a memory, not the memory itself. I blinked hard, shaking my head slightly. The feeling passed, like a cloud crossing the sun. A chill I couldn't explain traced a line down my spine. Unsettled, I stood up and changed the subject, suggesting we watch a movie, needing the distraction. The next morning sealed my nascent fear into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. As I was making coffee, Anna came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Do you remember that little restaurant in Florence?" she said, her voice warm with nostalgia. "The one where the owner's cat kept trying to steal your prosciutto and you ended up in a 20-minute full-blown conversation with it, arguing about feline ethics?" She laughed, expecting me to join in. It was a story I loved, a story I had told at dinner parties a dozen times. But as I searched my mind for it, I found nothing, a complete and total blank. I could remember being in Florence. I knew we went there for a honeymoon. I had the facts. But the scene she described, the cat, the owner, my own ridiculous dialogue, was gone. It was a hole. A perfectly carved out piece of my past was missing. I forced a laugh. "Wow, I'm drawing a blank, honey. Stress, I guess. Too many dusty artifacts." Anna pulled back, a slight frown on her face. "You're kidding, right? You love that story. You told it to my parents just last month." "Did I?" I stalled, my mind racing, scrambling for a purchase on a memory that simply wasn't there. The fear was no longer a knot. It was a cold liquid seeping into my veins. Her concern was palpable, but she let it go. As she left the kitchen, my eyes were drawn back to the living room, to the mantelpiece. I walked over to the wedding photograph, my coffee forgotten. It looked different. The colors seemed muted, less vibrant than I remembered them being just the night before. The brilliant green of the grass was now a duller olive. The joyful blush on Anna's cheeks looked washed out. It was as if a layer of gray dust had settled over it, but a dust that was part of the image itself. "Anna," I called out, my voice tight, "does this picture look faded to you?" She came back, standing beside me. She picked up the frame, tilting it in the morning light. She looked from the photo to my face, her expression now one of genuine worry. "No, David," she said slowly, her voice gentle. "It looks the same as it always has. Are you feeling all right?" I stared at the photograph. She was wrong. It was faded. I was sure of it. The memory was thin, and now the proof of the memory was beginning to decay. It was impossible. It was illogical. And it was happening. The image of the dark, empty box flashed in my mind, and with it, the faint phantom scent of cold ozone. I felt a profound and terrifying certainty that whatever was happening to me had started the moment I had lifted that lid. The decay accelerated with a terrifying specificity. It wasn't random memory loss, like misplacing car keys or forgetting a name at a party. It was a targeted, systematic erasure of the very cornerstones of my identity. The entity, the void, whatever it was a connoisseur of emotional significance. It didn't want my memory of last Tuesday's lunch. It wanted the day Lily was born. I remember standing in my office trying to conjure the memory. I knew the facts, the date, the hospital, the name of the doctor. I could recite them like a history student. But when I tried to recall the feeling, the overwhelming, heart-stopping wave of love and terror as I held my daughter for the first time, her tiny fingers curling around mine, there was nothing. It was a blank space, a perfectly silent, empty room in the architecture of my mind where a throne room used to be. I knew I loved my daughter, but the foundational memory of that love had been stolen, leaving the knowledge behind as a hollow, echoing fact. It happened again with my first date with Anna. I knew we went to an Italian restaurant. I knew she wore a blue dress. I knew I spilled wine on my shirt. The facts were there, like a dry encyclopedia entry, but the memory of her laughter, the nervous energy, the electric feeling of her hand in mine, it was gone, hollowed out. The physical world began to mirror this internal void. The fading wasn't just in my mind, it was manifesting around me. The most cherished objects, the ones saturated with the emotional energy of the memories now missing, were losing their color. A finger painting Lily had made for me when she was 4, a chaotic swirl of bright reds and yellows that I had framed and hung by my desk, now looked drab. The vibrant colors had receded into a dull, brownish palette. It looked like a child's crude scribble, devoid of the joy I knew it once held. When I asked Anna if she'd noticed it fading, she gave me that look again, that terrifying mixture of love and fear for my sanity. To her, it was as bright as ever. The true devastation came from Lily. Children have no filter. They are barometers of emotional truth. We had a ritual, a favorite shared memory we'd often talk about before bed. It was a trip to the zoo where a mischievous monkey had stolen the hot dog right out of my hand. It was a simple, silly memory, but it was ours. One evening as I was tucking her in, she said, "Daddy, tell the monkey story." I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I remembered the zoo. I remembered the monkey enclosure, but the event itself, the surprise, my yelp, her shrieking laughter, it was a whole. I tried to fake it, to piece it together from the fragments I assumed must be there. Ah, yes, the monkey. It was a monkey, and it took my food. Lily, who was usually beaming in anticipation, just stared at me, her little brow furrowed. There was no recognition in her eyes, no shared joy. She was looking at a man who was telling a bad story, not her father reliving a treasured moment. She pulled her blanket up to her chin, her lower lip trembling. "That's not how you tell it," she whispered. "You always laugh." I tried to force a laugh, but it came out as a dry, empty sound. The silence stretched between us, thick with her confusion and my rising panic. She kept looking at me, her gaze steady and serious. Then she said the 5 words that shattered my world. "You're not my daddy." It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact. A simple, innocent, devastating observation. The man who was there with her, the man who looked like her father and spoke with his voice, was missing the essential part of him that she recognized, the part that held their shared joy. He was an imposter. I left her room that night a broken man. I walked through the house, my home, which was now beginning to feel like a museum of a life I'd only read about. The colors of the photographs, the warmth of the memories were leaching away, and my own daughter could see it. She could see the blank spaces. The void from the box wasn't just in my head anymore. It was sitting in the room with me, and it was looking at my family through my own eyes. The box was locked away in a safe in my workshop, but its presence was a constant phantom limb. I could feel its influence wrapped around me, a persistent and spreading emptiness in my mind, where my most important memories used to be. A low-level, unnatural chill seemed to follow me from room to room, a cold that had nothing to do with the thermostat. And the smell of ozone, that sharp, sterile scent from the moment I opened the lid, now clung to my clothes, a perfume only I could detect. I would catch whiffs of it at random moments, while driving, while eating, while lying in bed next to my wife, and a fresh wave of quiet terror would wash over me. Anna's fear had metastasized. It was no longer a gentle concern about stress or overwork. It was raw, naked terror. She was living with a stranger, the man she had married, the man of deep passions, quick wit, and boundless love for his family was being sanded down into a bland, neutral state. I was a shell. I still went to work, paid the bills, and went through the motions of being a husband and father, but the emotional engine was gone. I was a ghost at my own dinner table, my conversations stilted, my responses to her affection placid and distant. One night, she broke down. I found her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, sobbing into her hands. When she looked up at me, her eyes were filled with a desperate plea. "David, who are you?" she wept. "When I look at you, it's like you're not there. You look at me and I can see you don't remember. You don't remember us." She grabbed my hands, her own trembling. "We have to see a doctor. Please, a neurologist. This could be a tumor or early onset dementia. Something is wrong with your brain and I can't watch you just disappear." Her words, meant to be an anchor to the real world of medicine and diagnosis, had the opposite effect. I knew, with the certainty that defied all logic, that this was not a medical issue. No MRI could find this void. No prescription could fill this emptiness. My affliction wasn't born of biology, but of folklore I had arrogantly dismissed. There was only one anomalous event in my life, one moment where the rational world had been breached, opening the box, finally admitting defeat, admitting that the world was larger and stranger than my skepticism allowed. I retreated to my office. I spent hours online, not looking for medical journals, but for the fringes, for the scholars of the esoteric, the historians of the unbelievable. And I found him. Elias Vance, a retired professor from an East Coast university, a scholar of Jewish mysticism and esoteric folklore, whose work I had once scoffed at as academic sensationalism. His articles were filled with references to golems, amulets, and, to my horror, a very specific and obscure type of apotropic vessel, sometimes mislabeled as a Dybbuk box. With a trembling hand, I found his contact information and dialed the number. An elderly, reedy voice answered on the third ring. "Vance. Mr. Vance, my name is David Chen. You don't know me, but I'm an appraiser and I've come across an artifact. I read your work." My voice trailed off. How could I say it without sounding insane? "What kind of artifact, Mr. Chen?" His voice was patient, but carried an edge of weariness, as if he'd heard 1,000 crank calls. I took a breath. "It's a box, an old wooden box, sealed with wax. It was sold as a Dybbuk box." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was not a dismissive silence. It was heavy, attentive. "And you opened it?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," I whispered. "What was inside, Mr. Chen?" "Nothing. It was empty. There was a strange smell like ozone, and I felt a moment of vertigo." Another pause, longer this time. When Elias Vance spoke again, all weariness was gone, replaced by a tone of profound and chilling gravity. "Where are you, Mr. Chen?" I told him my city. "I see. I have a colleague at the university there. I will call him. He will meet with you. Listen to me very carefully. Do not go near the box. Do not think about the box more than you have to. And whatever you do, do not bring it with you. Come immediately. This is not something that can wait." The line went dead, but his words echoed in the silent room. He wasn't dismissive. He wasn't skeptical. He was gravely serious. And in his seriousness, I found the most terrifying confirmation of all. This was real. Elias Vance's colleague was a man named Dr. Albert, a historian with kind eyes that held a deep, weary sadness, as if he'd spent a lifetime staring into abysses. He met me not in an office, but in a small private study in the university library, a room lined with ancient, leather-bound books that smelled of dust and time. There was no pretense, no questioning of my sanity. He listened patiently as I recounted the story, from the moment I won the auction to Lily's devastating words. When I finished, he nodded slowly, his fingers steepled before him. "Elias prepared me for this," he said, his voice low and somber. "What you have encountered is, thankfully, exceedingly rare. You are correct that it is not a Dybbuk. A Dybbuk is a possessing spirit, a noisy, chaotic entity that seeks to live. What you have found is, in many ways, its opposite." He stood and walked over to a heavy, locked cabinet, retrieving a fragile, yellowed manuscript. He laid it carefully on the desk between us. The text was in Hebrew, the script archaic. Some of the vessels that have been mislabeled Dybbuk boxes in modern folklore were never designed to be prisons. They were traps. They were created by mystics for something far older and more abstract than a simple ghost. They were designed to contain a fragment of Ein. "Ein?" I asked, the word feeling foreign and strange on my tongue. In the Kabbalistic tradition, it is the concept of nothingness, the primordial void from which all creation arose. It is non-existence. But some believe that within that absolute nothingness, there can be echoes, fragments of sentient void that are antithetical to life, to memory, to meaning itself. We call it the absence. The word hung in the air, cold and heavy. The absence. It was the perfect name for the hollowing out I felt inside. "The absence is a psychic parasite," Dr. Alpert continued, his gaze intense. "It doesn't possess, Mr. Chen. It erases. It latches onto a host with a strong life force, a deep well of emotional connections, and it feeds. It consumes what makes you a person, your memories, your love, your joy, your grief. The faded photograph you described, your own emotional numbness, those are the symptoms of it feeding on the meaning you have attached to your life. It is draining the color from your world, leaving behind only the gray, factual husk. It leaves the body behind, a functioning but empty vessel, a stranger to everyone who once loved it. A cold dread, so pure and absolute it felt like ice water flooding my heart, paralyzed me. Everything he said was a perfect, horrifying diagnosis of my condition. "The box," I managed to say, my throat tight. "What is the box?" He said it grimly. "The box is not its prison. It is its anchor, its lure into a world of substance it can consume. As long as the box exists, it has a tether to this plane of existence." I looked at him, my mind reeling, a desperate final question forming. "What is the final stage?" Dr. Alpert looked away, toward the dusty window. His voice dropped to a near whisper, laden with a terrible finality. "After it has consumed all of your personal memories, all of the emotional meaning that defines you as David Chen, it does not stop. The erasure spreads. It begins to erase you from the memories of others. The fading you see in the photographs will happen to you in their minds. Soon, your wife and daughter won't just feel like you're a stranger. They will have no memory of you at all. Your name will sound foreign to them. They will look at you with the blank confusion of seeing someone for the very first time." He paused, taking a deep breath before delivering the final, horrifying blow. "After that, it erases the physical proof. Records will vanish.
your driver's license, your birth certificate, your name on the deed to your house. It is a process of complete and total unmaking. The final stage, Mr. Chen, is a complete erasure from existence. You will not be dead. You will simply have never been.
The unmaking began faster than I could have imagined. It was no longer a slow fade. It was a hemorrhage. The day after my meeting with Dr. Alpert, I came home from my workshop, my mind a maelstrom of fear and arcane terminology. I walked into the living room where Anna was reading on the sofa. "Hi, honey," I said, my voice catching. She looked up, and for a split second, her face was a mask of polite confusion, a stranger's look. She blinked, and recognition seemed to flicker back into her eyes, but it was weak, like a failing light bulb. "David?" she said, but my name sounded hesitant on her lips. "You startled me." The terror was a physical thing, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. The process was accelerating. That night, it became undeniable. I woke up to find Lily standing in the doorway of our bedroom, a silhouette in the dim light from the hall. "Mommy," she whimpered, "there's a man in my house." Anna sat bolt upright, her protective instincts kicking in before she saw who Lily was pointing at. Me. I was the man in the house. She stared at me, then at Lily, her face a canvas of utter horror and bewilderment. She tried to soothe our daughter, telling her it was just Daddy, but her own voice lacked conviction. Lily just cried, hiding behind the doorframe, refusing to come near the strange man in her father's bed. Desperate to prove I was real, that we were real, I stumbled out of bed and went to the mantelpiece. I grabbed our wedding photograph, the one that was now so pale and washed out to my eyes. "Anna, look," I pleaded, thrusting it towards her. "This is us, remember? The oak tree, the rain." She took the frame from my shaking hands and stared at it. Her breath hitched. A tear traced a path down her cheek. I remember my wedding day. I remember this tree. I remember this dress." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. "But who are you? The man in this photo, his face it's blurry." I snatched it back and looked. Where my face had been, smiling at her, there was now only a smudge, a featureless, indistinct blur, as if the camera had failed to focus on me alone. The absence was not just eating my memories, it was eating the proof of them, erasing me from my own history. I was in a desperate race against my own oblivion. I had to fight it, but how? Elias Vance, through Dr. Alpert, had told me the box was the key, the entity's anchor. It couldn't be destroyed. That would unleash the void completely. It had to be filled. It had to be contained. My first panic thought was literal. I raced to my workshop, unlocked the safe, and pulled out the cold, dark box. My hands shaking, I filled it with the artifacts of my life. I put in photographs of me with Anna and Lily, old love letters, a silver locket my father had given me. I crammed it full of things that held meaning. But as I placed each item inside, I watched in horror as it was unmade. The vibrant colors of the photos instantly turned to gray and silver, the images becoming flat and lifeless. The ink on the letters faded to an illegible brownish stain. The silver locket grew dull and brittle, crumbling into dust at my touch. A wave of profound cold emanated from the box, and I realized my catastrophic mistake. It didn't feed on things. It fed on the meaning attached to things. I hadn't filled the box. I had just given the absence a feast. I had to find another way before there was nothing left of me to save. In a frantic late-night call, Dr. Alpert relayed the last desperate solution known to Elias Vance and the few scholars who knew of the absence. It was a piece of lore so dangerous and costly, it was almost never spoken of. The void was a perfect absence of meaning, a perfect vacuum. Physics and metaphysics, Alpert explained, abhor a vacuum. It could not be destroyed, but it could be filled. It could only be contained by an offering of equal or greater power, a single, perfect, and willingly sacrificed memory. Not just any memory, Mr. Chen, Alfred had warned, his voice grim. It must be your most cherished, most powerful, most emotionally resonant memory, a cornerstone of your soul. You must choose it, relive it, and then, with an act of pure will, push it into the box. Offer it as a sacrifice. The meaning and emotional energy of that single, perfect moment is the only thing dense enough to satisfy the void and trap it within the memory's architecture. But the cost is absolute. You will lose that memory forever. There is no recovery, no getting it back. It will be as if it never happened to you. The choice was an agony beyond words. To save my life, I had to amputate a piece of my soul. What memory defined me? My wedding day, the moment I pledged my life to Anna? A final perfect afternoon with my late father, a memory I had held onto like a sacred relic? Or the single most transformative moment of my existence, the birth of my daughter? I looked at the options laid out in my ravaged mind. The wedding was already fated. The memory of my father was precious, but it was in the past. The birth of Lily, that was the genesis of my present, the foundation of my future. It was the moment I became we in the most profound sense. It was the memory with the most power, the most love, the most terror, the most joy. It was the one. The sacrifice had to be the moment I became a father. I took the cold, empty box home from the workshop. The house was quiet. Anna and Lily were in the living room watching a movie. My wife now looked at me with a pained, fearful pity, as one might look at a confused amnesiac who had wandered into their home. My daughter hid her face when I entered the room. I was already a ghost to them. I went into my study and closed the door, placing the box on the desk in front of me. This was it. An intimate, silent battle for my own existence. I closed my eyes, shutting out the world, and I reached for the memory. For a moment, I feared it was gone. But then, it came. It flooded me with a clarity and intensity that stole my breath. The sterile smell of the hospital, the blinding fluorescent lights, the frantic, beautiful sound of Anna's breathing, the weight of her hand in mine, and then the moment. The doctor placing this tiny, fragile, screaming creature into my arms. I felt the astonishing weight of her, the warmth of her skin against mine. I looked down at her face, her eyes squeezed shut, her tiny mouth open in a cry that was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A wave of love so powerful, so absolute, so primal, crashed over me. It was terrifying and holy. In that single instant, I understood my purpose on this earth. It was to protect this child. This was my cornerstone, my most perfect memory. I relived it with every ounce of my being, soaking in every detail, every feeling, the joy, the fear, the love. Then, with the memory burning at its brightest, I opened my eyes and looked at the black, velvet-lined emptiness of the box, the void. With an act of supreme, agonizing willpower, I pushed. I imagined the memory as a sphere of brilliant, warm light in my mind. I took that sphere and I forced it outward, into the waiting maw of the box. I felt a horrifying, tearing sensation in my mind, a psychic amputation. It was a physical pain, a ripping of the very fabric of my consciousness.
A scream was torn from my throat as the memory, my most cherished memory, left me. As it entered the box, the pervasive cold that had surrounded the artifact vanished. A wave of intense freezing air washed out of it, followed by a soft, warm golden light that pulsed once brilliantly from within. The faint, persistent smell of ozone was gone, replaced for a single second by the sense of rain on grass. The light faded. The sensation was gone. I slammed the lid shut, my body trembling, sweat pouring down my face. My mind felt raw, wounded, empty in a new and terrifying way. I grabbed a candle from the desk and lit it, tilting it over the seam of the box. Hot, ordinary wax dripped down, sealing the absence inside its new prison, a prison made from the ghost of my greatest joy.
The aftermath was immediate and jarring. The door to the study opened. Anna stood there, her eyes glaring as if waking from a long dream. The fear and confusion on her face dissolved, replaced by familiar concern. "David, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice full of the warmth I had been so starved for. She knew me. Before I could answer, Lily darted into the room, a flash of pink pajamas. She didn't hesitate. She ran straight to me and threw her arms around my legs, hugging me tightly. "Daddy, you were making a scary noise." I knelt and pulled her into my arms, burying my face in her hair. She was real. This was real. Anna came and put her hand on my shoulder. My family was restored. I looked past them, into the living room. On the mantelpiece, our wedding photograph was vibrant again, alive with color and laughter. The absence was contained. I had won. But the scar was deep. Later that evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me. "Daddy, were you sad when I was born? Mommy says she cried because she was so happy." I looked into my daughter's trusting eyes and searched my mind for the answer. I found nothing. A perfect clinical blank. The facts were there. I knew she had been born. I knew I was there. I knew I was her father and that I loved her more than life itself. But the memory of holding her for the first time, the foundational moment of my fatherhood, was a void. It was a story I knew had happened, but it was not my story. I was very, very happy, I said, the words feeling like a line from a script. It was the correct answer, but the feeling behind it was absent. It was a permanent scar in my soul, the price I had paid. The next day, I contacted Mr. Finch and told him the artifact he'd requested was dangerously unstable and culturally priceless, a unique item that cannot belong in a private collection. I didn't tell him why. Per Dr. Albert's instructions, I arranged for the box, now sealed and silent, to be transported to a secure academic facility in another country, a place where it could be contained and studied by the few who understood its nature, a place where no one would ever be foolish enough to open it again. Months passed. Life returned to a semblance of normal, a happy, loving normal. But something within me had been fundamentally altered. The final appraisal came on a crisp autumn afternoon. A client had brought in a simple, antique silver locket. It was a routine job. I put on my gloves, my loupe, and with the practiced ease of a lifetime, I opened it. Inside were two tiny, faded portraits, no bigger than a thumbnail, a young mother and her infant child, their faces beaming with a love that transcended time. I stared at it. I noted the craftsmanship of the silver, the age of the photographs, the estimated value. I saw the history. I understood the object, but I felt nothing. The deep, empathetic connection to the story of things, the ability to feel the joy and sorrow embedded in an object, the very gift that had made me a great appraiser, was gone. It had been part of the memory I sacrificed. The love I felt for Lily was part of a larger tapestry, and in sacrificing the memory of her birth, I had sacrificed my connection to the birth of all such moments.
I closed the locket and handed it back to the client with a professional, empty smile. I have my family. I have my life, but I am forever haunted by the knowledge of what I've lost. I can see the world in all its beautiful detail, but I can no longer fully feel its history. I saved my home, but in the process, I carved out its cornerstone, leaving a perfect, hollow space inside me. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.